Welcome to the ISF podcast from the Information Security Forum, featuring timely conversations, practical insights, and resources for global cybersecurity professionals. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert. Today is the third episode in our four-part series focusing on the ISF's latest report, Threat Horizon 2024, The Disintegration of Trust. Steve, tell us what this even means. I mean, on the surface, I think I want choice. I am deserving of choice. But obviously, the report is presenting abundance of choice as a potential problem. Is that right? Tell me what you mean by that phrase, technology choices limit control, contained in the report.
Well, the technologies that organizations have adopted to accelerate their digital transformation, manage the move to hybrid working and engage with customers will slowly transpire to be a dead end. Enterprises are going to be forced to protect seemingly smart technology choices with a variety of defenses and workarounds just to avoid a series of unforeseen attacks and threats, some of which will come at them from pretty unexpected directions.
The first issue the report forecasts is that the cloud risk bubble bursts. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's right. So the benefits bestowed by moving more and more operational and business infrastructure to the cloud will be seen to have a hidden and rising cost as this strategy begins to stifle the flexibility organizations need to innovate and respond to incidents. So organizations will find that their technology choices are stunted and their options for switching supplier are limited by their reliance on particular cloud platforms and their partners.
Now that everything is in the cloud, that feels quite alarming. How can organizations prepare?
Well, we recommend that organizations take a somewhat proactive and joined-up approach to ensure that risk and opportunity are balanced in cloud strategy before reaching this point of no return where control is lost. Now, what that means in the short term is that organizations should really enumerate their cloud footprint to determine current levels of integration and to highlight any potential lock-in. And, we talked last week about the outward-facing part of the security professional role. And again, we're recommending that they establish appropriate governance around cloud orchestration to ensure understanding of the total footprint and control of its sprawl is maintained. Then internally, of course, organizations really need to seek clarity regarding cloud strategy and make sure that it unifies business and technology desired outcomes, and that must include business resilience. If we look a little bit further out, then the report recommends that organizations maintain the appropriate in-house or perhaps third-party teams to oversee the development of the cloud footprint, both from a supplier management standpoint and from a technical architecture and operations perspective. They also should be identifying and understanding single points of failure and mitigating against those single points of failure by building in redundancy and parallel processing.
So I think, as we've said many, many times, the basic understanding of the layout of your own business and knowing your potential vulnerabilities is imperative. So let's move on to the next potential problem the report highlights: activists pivoting to cyberspace. And I assume you're not talking e-newsletters. What do you mean by this potential problem?
Unfortunately not, no. What we mean is that highly motivated activists will seek to use established cybercriminal attack patterns to score political points and halt what they regard as unethical or unnecessary corporate behavior. Their attempts at sabotage will be aided by moves towards remote management of operational systems, factories, plants, and industrial installations via edge computing, 5G, and IoT technologies.
So, as always, I'll ask, what does ISF recommend organizations do to prepare for that?
Again, we go back to it's all about knowing your vulnerabilities. Information security practitioners are going to need to take a broad view of the way their organization works to assess the likelihood of its operations being targeted. Ethical and geopolitical motivations also need to be considered when drawing up that list of potential adversaries. Right now, that's going to look like engaging with threat intelligence teams to verify whether early warning indicators of a potential attack are actually being observed. But it will also mean conducting purple team exercises on remote installations to determine whether they can withstand attacks, as well as assessing the resilience of remote equipment to direct attack in consultation, of course, with physical security managers.
And in the long run, I imagine that you would recommend companies review their business processes and also their larger commercial relationships to assess if they could make the organization a target for activist groups?
Yeah, that's right. And we're also encouraging them to develop relationships with other departments to combat multi-vector attacks. They'd also need to manage and monitor access to mission-critical information assets to deter insiders keen to harm the organization.
And we've talked about insider threat before on the podcast, so we'll link that episode in the show notes so that listeners can revisit that conversation. There are some really good ideas there. Moving on to the last point, the report warns about misplaced confidence disguising low-code risks. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, the hard work of ensuring developers follow secure guidelines when creating apps and code will be undermined as easy-to-use coding tools really permeate across organizations. Enthusiastic users keen to get their projects running will turn to these tools beyond the oversight of the IT and information security departments, creating shadow development communities that are really ignorant, perhaps, of compliance demands, security standards, and data protection requirements.
How can organizations defend themselves from shadow developers? That's sort of a new concept to me. I've not heard that before.
Yeah, well, investigations are certainly going to need to be set up to really try to uncover applications that are being produced by no-code or low-code tools, as many employees simply won't be aware that they're using them or will fail to declare their existence. So we're back to things like training, awareness, monitoring, all of those sorts of things that can really help keep track of applications as they're deployed. So businesses can start that investigation now by defining, then assessing their organization's use of no-code, low-code tools and discover which applications have been created with them. They'll need to investigate data use by application, though, to see if business data and information is being accessed by these tools or resulting programs. And that shouldn't be underestimated. That is a very large task. And we're also suggesting that they perform high-level risk assessment of no-code, low-code tools and provide DevSecOps teams or their equivalent with pretty quick guidance on that basis.
What about longer term? What should companies be doing to combat the threat?
Well, in the long term, organizations should really look to establish some guidelines for how no-code, low-code tools really can be used as part of DevSecOps or equivalent processes. They need to require security reports from suppliers to determine how they safeguard their tools. They also need to understand whether no-code, low-code tool settings undermine internal information security requirements and modify any that do. And then finally, we're recommending that they provide access to materials on the safe use of easy-to-use programming tools into the organization's security training efforts.
So again, more training, more assessment of where your organization is, more assessment of what your vulnerable points are.
Exactly.
Steve, thanks as always for a wealth of information and really valuable guidance. Next week, you'll be back with me to discuss the final theme in the Threat Horizon report: dirty data disrupts business. Listeners, you can find the Threat Horizon Report 2024, The Disintegration of Trust, at securityforum.org. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes as well, along with links to some of the other resources we mentioned in today's discussion, including our podcast episode from 2019 focused on insider threat. You can also go back and listen to Threat Horizon reports from previous years here on our podcast. You can find those in our feed, and we'll also link those in the show notes. Find us on LinkedIn by searching CEO Steve Durbin or Security Forum. Follow our audio feed wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll never miss an episode. And if you like the ISF podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd rate us and write a short review. The ISF podcast is produced by Talkbox and Tavia Gilbert, with music by Alexander Filipiak. Senior producer, Katie Flood. Mix and master by Brian Barney. Thanks for listening.